Recording. And let me give you an official welcome to Wellness Wednesdays. My name is Sally Duplantier. I am the founder of a company called Zing, and my mission is to help people live their best life longer through better nutrition, more movement, better sleep, and less stress. And one way I execute on my mission is through these free Wellness Wednesday webinars. And today, I'm not only the host, but I'm also a speaker along with my special guest, Dr. Annie Fenn. Hi, Annie. So let me give you a little
Hi,
bit of,
everybody. Hi, Sally.
hello. I want to give you a
Nice
little,
to be here. Thanks for asking me.
I'm so glad you're here, Annie. So today's program is a little bit special for a Wellness Wednesday because it's a full hour, but it will be recorded. And we're going to speak for around 50 minutes, a combination of presentation and cooking demo. And then we'll take the last 10 minutes for questions. So as we go, if you have a question, you can type it into the Q&A. Now, let me share with you a little bit of context. And this, to me, it's pretty exciting. So after I did my certificate in nutrition science at Stanford, I went to grad school. Annie and I were kidding earlier. Yes, I'm the only person at USC, the only grad student who's also on Medicare. But I am studying the science of aging at USC, and I had an opportunity this year to do an internship. So I teamed up with Dr. Christopher Gardner, who is a professor of medicine at Stanford. He's one of the top nutrition scientists working on disease prevention. And together we researched this topic. How do neuroprotective diets protect against cognitive decline? Now, that term neuroprotective diets might be new to you, so let me explain briefly the diets that we studied. And I'm pretty sure most of you have heard of at least one of these. So the Mediterranean diet has been around for decades. It probably came into an existence maybe in the 50s or 60s in Crete and Greece and countries of the Mediterranean. And it's associated with a particular foods and also lifestyle of the Mediterranean people. It's considered one of the healthiest diets around. The DASH diet was developed in the 90s, and it's based largely on the Mediterranean diet, but it also has a special emphasis on sodium reduction to stop hypertension. And then the MIND diet, which is the diet that we're going to be talking about today, is really a hybrid of the two, and it was designed specifically to focus on neuroprotective benefits. Now, as I was doing this research, I also had an opportunity to meet some amazing people. I talked to experts really around the world who were specialists in neuroprotective health. And Annie Fenn, MD, is joining us for the second half of this program. Annie is a board certified OBGYN. She practiced for 20 years, and then I love this, she realized that she could help people in a bigger way through better nutrition. So she went to culinary school, she became a chef and a culinary instructor, and she also founded the BrainHealth Kitchen. So she's currently conducting healthy cooking classes across the globe, and she is working on an upcoming cookbook, which will be published in 2022. And I share this with a bit of a smile because the reason she's turned off her video is because they are doing a photo shoot at her cabin in Idaho for this cookbook. We didn't plan it, it just happened. It's happening for multiple days. So she's going to be joining us for the second half of the session. But for now, we're letting them continue their photo shoot. So here is what Annie and I want to share with you today. I'm going to be talking about why brain health is important, especially important now. And given the number of people who signed up for this program, I think you all are pretty aware of that. We have a record 254 participants for today's session. I will also be talking about the MIND diet. I'll first share with you what foods to enjoy and what foods to eat less of. And then I want to dive a little bit deeper into the science and the research that Dr. Gardner and I did in terms of why we think this diet improves brain health. After that, I will turn it over to Annie for a cooking demonstration and recipes, which we will also send to you in the follow-up email. So our goal today is pretty simple, that you just have one good idea that you can apply to your own diet. All right, why is brain health so important now? And this has to do with an almost exponential rise in dementia. Now, dementia is kind of an umbrella term. We hear a lot about Alzheimer's disease, and that is the most prevalent type of dementia. But you can see from this graph, there's also vascular dementia, and then lesser known types, Lewy body and frontotemporal. Interestingly enough, Alzheimer's and vascular dementia make up almost 90% of the types of dementia that people experience. And oftentimes there is a mixed dementia where people have physiological symptoms of both Alzheimer's and vascular. Now, this was kind of shocking to me when I did the research, is that Alzheimer's disease is now the 7th leading cause of death in the world. And what's interesting about this disease is that until very recently, there were no drugs on the market that would reverse the disease or halt it or slow down its progression after the disease started. There are some emerging drugs coming out now, but for the most part, this has been a largely untreated disease. It's also a disease that, as I mentioned, is growing exponentially. By 2050, so in the next 30 years, it's going to affect more than 115 million people globally. Currently in the US, it affects about 6 million. So you can see there's a huge rise in both developed and undeveloped countries. It's also a disease with a high price tag. An annual cost of $1 trillion in the US alone is predicted if we don't change this trajectory by 2050. Now, what's interesting is Alzheimer's is a disease of stages. So there is some pathophysiology associated with normal aging of the brain. So not everyone who has age-related brain changes will develop mild cognitive impairment, or MCI, but some people do. And then some people who develop MCI will go on and develop Alzheimer's. And while there is some genetic correlation, about 90% of Alzheimer's is what we call sporadic, which means that there's no family history. So one of the things that researchers are studying is how can we slow the progression of this disease? How can we make changes so we don't go from here to here, or worse yet, from mild cognitive impairment to Alzheimer's? And a lot of research is in this area because if we could slow the progression of this disease, delay the onset of Alzheimer's by just 5 years, it could reduce the incidence and cost by almost half. That's pretty staggering. So a key theme from our research, and I think that you will be hearing in some of the courses that you're taking too, if you're at Stanford, is that lifestyle choices, including diet, make a difference. And with that, I want to talk a little bit about the MIND diet. Now, I have a polling question for you. I'm just curious, for the people that are on the call today, have you heard of the MIND diet? I'll give you a few seconds to answer here. Kind of a mixed bag. I see we have 104 people on, so I'm giving people a chance to respond. All right, 82% of the votes are in, and let me go ahead and share the results. So interestingly enough, about 33% of you have heard of it. The other 2/3 haven't. It's not, it, I wouldn't be surprised if people hadn't heard of it. I hadn't heard of it actually until I started grad school at USC. That's because it's a relatively recent diet. So the MIND diet was only developed in the last 6 years, and it was created by a team at Rush Medical Center that's focused specifically on neuroprotective health. It is a hybrid, so it kind of takes the best elements of the Mediterranean diet, which I mentioned, and also the DASH diet. And again, as I said here, it's designed for neuroprotective benefits. It is mostly plant-based, but it's not vegan or vegetarian because it includes fish and chicken. And the reason I decided to focus on the MIND diet for this presentation is that it's relatively simple and easy to implement. So there's 15 foods, and if you don't remember them, it's okay because they're going to be in your handout. But there are 10 brain healthy foods which ideally you consume more of. They include whole grains, quinoa, farro, even whole wheat bread, nuts and seeds, berries, leafy greens, vegetables, other kinds of vegetables, fatty fish like salmon and tuna, chicken, red wine in moderation, okay, 1 glass a day, beans, and olive oil. And something that's kind of specific to the MIND diet are these two kind of dietary components. Let me start with berries. So berries were studied by the Rush team, and they were included in this diet and not other types of fruit. So they found, based on some of the research that they did, that berries were more neuroprotective. I have read a lot of studies. I've probably read 150 studies, and I would tell you not to eliminate other forms of fruit. Fruit is great for you, but also include berries in your diet. Leafy greens, oh my gosh, the health benefits of leafy greens are very compelling. And the MIND diet emphasizes 1 serving 6 times a week, which is basically a salad a day, in addition to other vegetables. So these are the brain healthy foods to eat more of. Then there are 5 unhealthy brain foods. And while they don't need to be eliminated completely, the scoring for this diet is based on reduced quantities. And no surprise here, it's red meat, sweets and pastries, cheese, fried and fast food, and butter and margarine. And so one thing that you see with the MIND diet is an emphasis on healthy dietary fat that comes from plants and less emphasis on the standard American diet, which is also sometimes referred to as the SAD diet, which is primarily animal-based fats. And, for a while in the 90s, there was a no fat or low fat craze, but we've discovered since then that plant-based fats are really good for you, not only for your brain, but your overall health. So in the MIND diet, what you don't eat is as important as what you eat. It's not just the emphasis on, for example, healthy fats like avocado or the fats from nuts or olive oil, but it's avoiding the saturated fats. Now, a little question for you. What other unhealthy food is avoided in the MIND diet? You can type this into the chat. Take a guess in the chat if you think you know what other. And if I need, I can give you a little hint. I'm going to go back up. Okay, you guys got it. Sugar, red meat, hot dogs. The red meat and hot dogs are the saturated fat, but a lot of you guessed already the sugar. And so because sweets are limited, they're not avoided completely, but because they're limited, you're not getting a lot of sugar, which is such a big part of the standard American diet. You're also not getting a lot of sodium. So while the MIND diet doesn't specifically restrict sodium, the net is that you're eating a lot of whole foods. You're eating real food, not processed food. You're not eating you're not eating lean cuisines. You're not eating Frito-Lay chips. And so because you're avoiding processed food, you're also getting less salt. Now, that's an overview of 10 healthy foods and 5 unhealthy foods. But I want to talk a little bit more about the research findings because I think it's logical to ask, well, how does it help us from a neuroprotective perspective? So I am delighted to say that not only did Dr. Gardner and I write a paper, but we got our paper published. So this paper, a critical review of the study of neuroprotective diets to reduce cognitive decline, it was published on June 30th in a publication called Nutrients. It's a peer-reviewed journal. It's also 36 pages, and I'm not going to give you details of all 36 pages. I want to simply share some relevant highlights. So we started with 140 studies. We curated that down to 32 that we included, and those were 5 randomized clinical trials and 27 observational studies. And I differentiate these because RCTs, or randomized clinical trials, are really needed to show cause and effect. In observational studies, there's correlation, but not causation. And so one thing I want to share about the research is that, yeah, we need more RCTs to show, to demonstrate more causation. Of these, a small number was we looked at were the mind studies. We looked at every mind study we could. One included an RCT, which is still underway, so I can't share those findings yet. But then we looked at 5 mind observational studies, all of which I will say were well designed. So here were some key findings. 4 of those 5 studies that dealt with the mind diet showed a positive relationship in terms of eating these brain healthy foods, avoiding the unhealthy ones, and the link between cognitive decline. So you can see one, there's a reduced incidence of Alzheimer's disease. This was another study. This was done in Australia, 12 years. It showed neuroprotective benefits of the mind diet, but not the Mediterranean. In this particular study, adherence to the mind diet was associated with better test scores on an instrument that's commonly used called the mini mental state exam. But I think this one coming out of Russia is probably the most compelling. So in this particular study, and I believe it was over 6 years, the people who ate in the top third, like the top third of adherence to the mind diet, demonstrated 7.5 years younger in age compared to the bottom third of people in that study, based on a series of 19 cognitive tests. So it was pretty compelling, but again, I'm going to stress that it's an observational study. One particular study had mixed findings, and so this was a subset of the Nurses' Health Study, and it was well designed, 16,000 people, 6 years, battery of cognitive tests. So here they found that people who adhered to the mind diet did better on one particular type of test, verbal memory score, but they didn't see the association with cognitive decline. And in my perspective and Dr. Gardner's, it means that more research is needed. It doesn't mean that we shouldn't follow this diet, because I love what Dr. Gardner says. What's the worst that could happen? We would eat more healthy food, plant-based food, and healthy fats. So one thing I want to stress in our research is that dietary pattern is important. It's not just one magic food, it's a combination of quantity, variety, combination frequency. It's a little bit like, there's no, as I mentioned, there's no single magic brain food. And it's a little bit like a soup that you make where the end result is more important than, or tastes different than any one ingredient. So, we know about benefits of vitamins and minerals, but there are a lot of micronutrients that actually that are part of plants and go into the health benefits. So I am going to briefly explain these, and then I'm going to be turning this over to Dr. Fenn. So in terms of the biology, why are these foods or food groups or combinations protective? And you can see at the top of my slide, I've listed 4 different ways of kind of biological mechanisms. So many of these foods provide vascular protection. They keep our arteries healthy. And remember, there's vascular dementia, and vascular pathology is also found in a lot of people with Alzheimer's. So vascular protection is key, and anti-inflammatory protection is key. Chronic systemic inflammation is associated with almost every disease state, including Alzheimer's disease. So foods that can provide anti-inflammatory protection are good for us. They're good for our brains and our health. And the same is true with antioxidants. Basically, you've heard of oxidative stress or free radicals. Our cells become damaged at the molecular level through age, and antioxidants can protect with that. And then there is also neural protection, the brain neurons themselves. So a number of these foods provide neural protection. Probably the most important one I want to emphasize that we don't eat enough of is fatty fish. It has something called DHA, and the brain itself consists of quite a bit of DHA. So it is even eating 1 or 2 servings a week can make a difference. Also, these foods that I've talked about are good for our overall health. So you can see here that consuming the Mind Diet foods and avoiding those 5 unhealthy foods protects us from other disease, cardiovascular, hypertension, stroke, diabetes, and obesity. And all of these are known risks for dementia. So, kind of in summary, we want to eat more of these brain healthy foods. And a great way to start is just to pick one that you might not eat a lot of. Eat more berries, eat more fatty fish, eat more greens. I know everybody wants me to say drink more wine, but it's 1 glass a day. And then, is there something you need to eat less of? Based on my research, I've stopped using cheese as my go-to snack. I still eat it in small quantities, but not every day like I used to. So that is a quick overview. I am now going to turn this over to Annie, and I think she's going to turn her camera back on. I think. This is the part of the presentation that's always a little scary, but I think she's still with us. Ah, I got a message. She's logging back in. She's logging back in now. While she's logging in, I'm going to answer one question. Chicken is recommended both white and dark meat. What about turkey? I think chicken and turkey are fine. Dark meat has more saturated, it has more fat in it than white meat. So that's why white meat is, kind of typically preferred. To be honest, in the research, it doesn't say as much about chicken as it did about fatty fish. Does weight or BMI have a correlation when on the Mind Diet? The new RCT that's coming out of Rush, the one that I mentioned, is looking at caloric restriction because there does seem to be a correlation between obesity and Alzheimer's. And so a belief is that if we can reduce BMI, if we can reduce if we can actually reduce obesity and BMI, that there is going to be more neuroprotective benefit. How much grain is recommended? I tend to eat keto-ish, no grains 3 to 4 times a week. I am going to be sending you a handout, and it's going to have recommended quantities of these foods based on the current RCT that's going on at Rush. Note that there is mild caloric restriction with that. I think in general that we can avoid grains, we can avoid good carbs when it may not be necessary. Now, I'm just checking. Annie is back. We just did a little song and dance. I covered a few questions. That's fun. I love it. All right, Annie, let me go ahead and stop my share here. And I'm going to turn my video off and my audio, and I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. Hi, everybody. Just so you know, I switched to LTE, so the Wi-Fi is a little off. So if there's a pause, you'll just see me going back between Wi-Fi and LTE, but we'll get it done. So that was a wonderful presentation, Sally. You hit all of the most important things about the MIND diet. And I think that understanding the 10 brain healthy food groups in the MIND diet and also the 5 food groups to avoid or limit in your diet is really like the very first best step when you're trying to eat for better brain health. So what I want to do today is I'm going to draw from some of those brain healthy food groups, and I want to show you just a couple really easy sauces. I think that when people start trying to eat more healthily, they forget that some of the most flavorful foods are the ones that we really want you to eat more of. So a healthy diet doesn't have to be bland, it doesn't have to be boring at all. And sauces, having really great sauces is part of that. So the first sauce I'm gonna make is a cilantro chutney. And it's a really easy, you can do it in your blender, you can do it in your food processor. I guess you could hand chop it too. If you wanted a coarser one, that would work as well. And a lot of people now have like a lot of cilantro going off in the garden. And as Sally mentioned, leafy greens is one of the brain healthy food groups. And in the MIND diet, they would really love you to eat at least 1 cup raw of leafy greens a day. In my own guidelines that is coming out in my upcoming book, I actually bumped that up to 2 cups a day. I think 2 cups of leafy greens a day is attainable for most people, especially if you like salad, but also know that tender herbs like cilantro are considered leafy greens. So there's that, there's a bonus. And the other thing about cilantro and other herbs that have edible stems is that there's so much nutrient density in the stem. So another reason I really like this recipe is that I'm not asking you to pick all the leaves from the stems, because everyone's done that before and we know how tedious that can be. If you want to garnish something, sure, it looks really pretty. But no, what we're going to do is we are just going to include the stems and all I did was trim off the very bottom woody part. And we're going to use the whole thing to make our cilantro chutney. So cilantro is number 1. And you can riff on this. If you're not a cilantro person, you could certainly use another type of herb you like parsley, Italian parsley, or you could do a basil version. That would be really delicious. So we've got that. And now how do you make brain healthy food creamy and delicious, satiating, like so that you get that, that feeling like, oh, this is just so filling and delicious, without using dairy products or high fat products. I like to use a lot of nuts. So nuts are another brain healthy food group. The recommendation is about a 1/4 cup of nuts most days. That's about 5 days a week. And it's limited to that just because nuts are high in calories. But when it comes right down to it, you could probably eat more than that. Eating a handful of nuts most days has been proven to reduce your risk of cardiovascular events like heart attack and stroke. And now we're finding it's a very important part of the brain healthy diet as well. So I like to use cashews. I use raw unsalted cashews. And the thing that makes them creamy is just a short soak in a bowl of water. So this is a 1/4 cup of cashews. And I've just been soaking them while we've been talking and listening to Sally's presentation. Usually 15 minutes is minimal, or you can put them in a bowl and forget about them for a couple hours. Change out the water, and then you're ready for your recipe. Sometimes I soak them overnight too. I think, okay, tomorrow I want to make this, this, and this. So I'll just soak a bunch of nuts, leave it on the countertop, and then drain off that water and discard the soaking water before I proceed with my recipe. So what we're going to do with this recipe, I'm going to save a little bit of this water, just because if my cilantro chutney is too chunky, and I want to just be a little bit creamier, I'm going to add a little bit of this water to it. And they've only been soaking for a few minutes, so that is totally fine to do. But like I said, if you soak for longer, I would definitely discard that water. And then we also have lemon juice. This is 4 teaspoons of lemon juice. And after we make the chutney, I'm going to ask you to taste it, because this is such a great combination of sweet and salty and spicy and tart foods that it really is a personal preference thing. What makes it spicy is we're going to add a pepper. And I usually call for serrano pepper. You can find those at most grocery stores. Mine didn't have one, so I have a little Thai chili pepper. And these are super spicy. If you want to reduce the heat in your dish, all you do is cut your pepper in half, and then you're just going to scrape out the seeds. And you can save those seeds for later. You know, like if you taste it and you're like, oh, that's really not that spicy at all, I could use a little bit more heat. Then you've got a little pile of seeds here on the side of your cutting board. Okay, so I'm going to put my little Thai chili in there. That's probably going to be plenty of heat. And then I'm going to add a teaspoon of honey. Now, like Sally was talking about, we don't eat a lot of sugary foods in the diet. The mind diet doesn't specifically address how much sugar you should eat, because sugar isn't really a food, right? Sugar is not a food group, like a vegetable or a berry would be. So whenever I cook with sugar, I want something sweet, just try to make sure that the rest of the dish has a lot of fiber. The thing we're worried about with sugary foods, and this even includes natural ones like honey and maple syrup and dates, is that you don't want the sugar to hit your bloodstream super fast, which will stimulate a rise of insulin, and it's bad for your metabolic health. And a lot of people are looking at Alzheimer's and other types of dementias as evolving in an environment in your body where there's been too much sugar chronically being consumed. And therefore your pancreas gets really tired and you are not really as healthy as you could be. You start to gain weight, but the same thing is happening in the brain. The brain actually becomes insulin resistant as well. So whenever I use honey or maple syrup or something else, there's going to be a lot of
Annie, you're on mute. Can you unmute yourself? We lost you for a second. Good. Yeah.
So we just added the Thai chili pepper. I've got turmeric and salt. And turmeric, as most people probably know, is considered good for you. Turmeric has many active ingredients, one of which is curcumin. And the thing with turmeric is that it's really difficult for your body to absorb a lot of those phytonutrients. So sometimes turmeric needs a little help. That's why it's great in a sauce. That's why it's great to cook it in a little bit of oil before you use it. And another trick you can do, we're not going to use pepper in this dish, but if you use turmeric and black pepper in a 1-to-1 ratio, the piperine, which is the active ingredient in black pepper, actually helps you absorb more of the anti-inflammatory benefits of the turmeric. And get high quality turmeric, because it is going to lose a lot of its anti-inflammatory impact with age. It's definitely shelf stable. All right, so time for our chutney. I've got this all in a food processor, and we're just gonna buzz it. Smells amazing. I'm going to add a little bit of that soaking water I talked to you about, just to give it a little bit more of a saucy tendency. Now this freezes well, which I find is a huge time saver, because let's say you just want to make a really simple dish for supper and you don't really have a lot of time. And so what you do is, maybe you're grilling a piece of chicken or you're poaching a piece of fish. And then you have your cilantro chutney all ready to go in the freezer. It probably would defrost by the time that the rest of your dinner is ready. And I like mine a little bit chunky, but we're gonna add a little bit more water and buzz it one more time, just to make it a little saucier.
And I'll just add that Annie is going to be I'm going to be sending out these recipes. So I know some of you are madly writing down the ingredients and quantities, but I promise that you will receive these ingredients tomorrow, along with the recording.
Absolutely. This is one of the recipes I have on my website as well, on BrainHealth Kitchen. So we have our cilantro. Now you have to remember that turmeric will stain your countertop, will stain your clothing, will stain pretty much everything it comes in contact with. So, and I never, ever cook with turmeric without staining something. So it's not a big deal. And there we go. It makes about a half a cup. And I really like this on salmon. It's probably one of my favorite applications, is to put it on a salmon that's been cooked at a very low temperature in the oven, like 300 degrees, or on indirect heat on the grill. It's probably one of my favorite things. It's also good with halibut. I like it with grilled chicken. I don't eat that much chicken, but it is good with that as well. But I'd also use it on, say I was making a taco and I wanted to take it into, more Indian flavors. Like I was using roasted cauliflower, for example, or I added mango to it and black beans. This would be really good on an impromptu taco. So that is a cilantro chutney. And I will switch over to our next one, which also comes together super easy. It has even less ingredients. And this is a creamy red pepper sauce. Now this is great for tacos. This is great for enchiladas. This is great for any of your Mexican American styled food. And another thing that I love about cooking for brain health is when I make something like a stuffed poblano chili, or a cauliflower taco, or a chicken taco, or a salmon taco. All of those ingredients that you use to make these dishes are so good for you. There's a lot of vegetables, there's beans, there's whole grain tortillas, like either whole grain flour or flour tortillas. But it's the sauces and the cheese that people put on these foods that tend to, make it veer into the brain unhealthy category. So that's one reason I came up with this sauce. It also uses cashews, and I'm just using a jar of roasted red peppers. There's lots of different brands. This is a good one. It's Mediterranean Organic. I love this brand. Also, there's another one called Mezzetta. They're really nice roasted peppers. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a cup of roasted peppers. I'm going to use my blender. I'm going to use, my recipe calls for 1 large garlic clove, but I'm going to use 2 small ones because that's what I've got. And then I don't know if you're familiar with this ingredient, but these are chipotle peppers in adobo sauce. You find them in a little can at your grocery store. It's a great flavor bomb. It's a great thing to have in your pantry to add flavor to dishes. It's basically a very smoky and very spicy pepper that is cooked in an adobo sauce, which contains tomatoes. So you've got lots of antioxidants going into this dish. These are super spicy, so maybe just start with half and then actually go up on it if you want to. The reason that peppers, like I said, are so good for you is it has an anti-inflammatory component called capsaicin. And capsaicin is in red peppers, yellow peppers, it's in sweet peppers, it's in spicy peppers. So if you like peppers, it's good to know that not only do they provide a lot of fiber and vitamin E, that they're giving you specific brain health nutrients. I've got a cup of cashews that I have been soaking. This is what makes it creamy. And this was part of the thinking behind having a sauce that's really rich in healthy fats. Those are mostly the monounsaturated fats, but low in saturated fat, because the brain healthy diet is all about low saturated fat. It's less full fat dairy, it's less butter, it's less cheese, it's less red meat. All of those are on the foods to avoid list from the Mind Diet study. And the reason is we have very good data that shows the more saturated fat in your diet, the greater your risk of Alzheimer's. It's not controversial whatsoever. So the Mind Diet is not a low-fat diet by any means. Like Sally was talking about the low-fat craze. That's not what we want to get back into. That was a disaster. But what we want is to be able to reach for the brain healthy fats. These are mostly mono and polyunsaturated fatty acids, which includes the omega-3s. We're super important for brain health. Nuts and seeds, olive oil, avocados, things like that are going to give you plenty of these fats. And they also make your food delicious, satisfying, and they can replace a lot of the cheese in your diet. Now, the Mind Diet guidelines for cheese, people are always a little taken aback when they learn that they can only have an ounce of cheese a week. It's not very much. Actually, the Mind Diet trial, which is the ongoing study coming out soon, increased that to 2 ounces a week. It's still not very much. That's like a 1-inch cube of Parmesan cheese. So I'm not saying that you have to be that austere with your cheese intake. However, it just sort of brings home the importance of limiting saturated fat in your diet. So we've got our chipotle chilies, we've got our red peppers, we've got our cashews, and we have our garlic. And that's pretty much it. Simplest sauce ever. If you don't have a fancy blender like a Vitamix, you can do this in a food processor. You might have to just blend it a little bit longer. That's about it. This is one of the favorite sauces in a lot of the cooking classes I do. People just love how creamy and rich it is. It doesn't have to be spicy. You could leave out a lot of the chipotles if you choose to. And you can just see, and it smells like roasted red peppers, which who doesn't love that, right? Smells delicious. We're actually, like Sally said, we're doing a cookbook shoot all this week for 11 days in a row. And this is one of the components of one of our dishes. And it's going to go on our cauliflower tacos. But this is also a great thing for, say, a pot of beans. Let's say you make a bowl of beans and you have it with a corn tortilla and you have some avocado. You put on a little bit of creamy red pepper sauce. This will last in your fridge for about 5 days. I haven't froze it. It probably would freeze just fine. And it's just nice to have dollops of these flavorful ingredients in your pantry that also boost the brain health nutrition of the food. So kind of a win-win situation.
So Annie, this is great. We are getting a lot of questions. So I have one final summary slide, but I want to let people know we're going to be sharing the recipes. There's a handout that includes a lot of highlights from these slides because I know there is a lot of information. I'm going to just share one tip. You mentioned freezing the sauces. Something I like to do with some of the sauces that Annie has shared is freeze them in an ice cube tray. And that way, if you just want a little bit for serving a fish, you can just pop out, like an ice cube or two of it. All right, let me go back. And I just have kind of one key takeaway. And that is that you are never too old or too young to benefit from these brain healthy foods. Because remember, brain healthy foods are good for your overall health. And I think one of the most striking pieces of the research that we did was that Alzheimer's disease and other dementia, the pathology is present in middle age. It's not something that happens suddenly when we're 65. So those of you who are older adults, share this presentation, this link, and the tips with your younger adult children, because it's never too old or you're never too young to start. So with that, let me stop sharing.
There's another study that I love sharing with people just to drive home that point. In Scotland, they did a study of older adults in their 70s. They're actually between the ages of 73 and 76. And they started them on the Mediterranean diet, which the Mayan diet is very, very, very similar to the Mediterranean diet. And they actually have MRI data showing that they were able to have brain changes over the course of the 3 years that they switched from a standard diet, which is like our standard American diet, to the Mediterranean diet. Their brains were larger than if they weren't eating the Mediterranean diet. And brain volume is everything when it comes to holding on to your cognitive function as you get older and reducing the risk of age-related cognitive decline. You want robust blood flow to your brain. That's with the cardiovascular piece, all the cardiovascular health. But you also, in these studies, when they're looking at brain volume, that's what they're looking at. It's basically a number of brain cells that you get to hold on to.
Yeah, no, it's very compelling. So let's go ahead. We're going to dive into these questions. I mean, so many of them are good. And Annie, some of these I can answer, but some of them I'm glad you're here. So grass-fed beef, have you studied that? Because I haven't. Alice asked about grass-fed beef.
I took a deep dive into looking at the different types of meats that are available, writing my book this year. And as you know from the Mind Diet, the foods to avoid, one of them on the foods to avoid list is red meat. The recommendation is keep it under 4 small servings a week. A small serving is about 3 ounces, about that much. So people always ask, well, what kind of meat should I eat? The Mind Diet doesn't get that granular and specific about this because it would be very hard to do a large scale study and just mandate that people eat just grass-fed beef or whatever. They weren't really looking at that. They're just like cutting down all meat. So grass-fed meat, and I'm talking about 100% grass-fed, because sometimes it will say grass-fed on the label, but it's actually finished with grain as well. But 100% grass-fed beef has a much healthier fat profile in terms of brain health nutrition. That's because there's more of the alpha linoleic acid in the grass that the animals eat. That's an omega-3 fatty acid. It's a plant-based omega-3 that's very important for brain health. And when you eat meat that has come from, a feedlot or have been fed sort of a junk food diet for them is a lot of the feed that they get. A lot of it's just high in calories to fatten them up and low in nutrients. It actually changes the fat profile of the meat. So you're getting more omega-6 fatty acids, which are inflammatory. You're getting less omega-3s. There's more saturated fat in the meat, and it's just really not as good for you. So I cook almost exclusively with grass meat. I live in Wyoming, so it's actually not difficult to do that because I know lots of ranchers who are very careful about the way they raise their animals. But you can also buy grass-fed bison, which is a great stand-in for beef. And bison in a package that's commercially available is 100% grass-fed. And also the animals are mandated because of regulations to have a very high quality of life in terms of space or grazing, things like that.
Well, that's a great answer. Thank you. This one's similar from Sarah. How about, is frozen wild-caught salmon as neuroprotective as fresh salmon?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If you're getting a good source of wild salmon, I can point you in the right direction if you need someplace to buy, they actually freeze it on the boat. And that is the best way to lock in the nutrients. And what you see at the grocery store, at the fish counter, unless you live on one of the coasts and the fish just came in, like say you lived in Portland or something, it's been frozen on the boat, and then they might defrost it, to display it for you. And so it's already been frozen. Where I live, I would never buy fresh salmon. I would only buy it if it had been frozen on the boat. And the important thing about wild caught salmon versus farm salmon is that it has a high amount of DHA. That's one of the essential omega-3 fatty acids that is absolutely crucial for brain health. If you're DHA deficient, your risk of Alzheimer's can be as high as 70% more than if your DHA levels are good. DHA is incredibly important. It may be one of the reasons that the pescatarian diet is one of the healthiest diets for brain protection. So I'm not going to say I'll never eat farm salmon again. When you go to a restaurant, I'd be willing to bet that the salmon on the menu is farm raised. Wild caught is more expensive. Farm raised salmon has not as healthy of a fat profile. It's very similar to the story about beef and grass versus corn. We're talking about farmed raised fish getting feed of some sort that might be GMO, might be soy. It has higher calories and it has more saturated fat in it as well. So wild caught salmon costs more, but it's worth it. And you don't need to eat salmon every day or high quality fish. One serving of high quality fish or seafood a week will give you all the DHA that your brain needs.
Yeah, it's not a lot, but I think it's something that's missing in a lot of diets. Then we bring up Impossible Burgers and Beyond Burgers. I'd be interested, Annie, in your point of view on these.
You know, I just go right to the ingredient list. If there's things on that ingredient list that sound like chemicals, or there are types of oils that I want to avoid in my diet, like soybean oil or safflower oil, or a lot of the seed oils are very high in omega-3 fat, omega-6 fatty acids, the ones that are more inflammatory. If there's a lot of sodium, if there's just a lot of things in there, and you know the list of ingredients is this long, I'm not interested. I understand from a health perspective how important it is to have plant-based alternatives to meat. And I love that this what do you call it, Impossible Burger is maybe served at fast food restaurants in the future. I think that's amazing. But for my personal health and that of my students and the people that I would recommend it, I'm not really recommending it. You know, I think it's just going to get better and better. It's going to evolve. These were the prototypes. They put so much research and development into them. And for what people have told me, they actually taste a lot like meat. So that people I know have been vegetarian for a long time just think they don't taste good. They taste too much like meat. So I don't know. I would steer away from it.
Yeah.
If you're I was at a wedding recently, and this is a big deal for Wyoming, and there were Impossible Burgers on the buffet. First time I'd ever seen that, because it's a very beef-centric state. And so I tried one, and sorry, it doesn't do it for me. I would actually have a grass-fed burger instead. And if I was vegetarian, I mean, I guess that's just up to you.
Yeah. And I think with Impossible Burgers, they were originally developed for meat eaters who wanted an alternative to meat. They weren't like designed for vegetarians. Initially, when they came out, they were very high in fat. And that has been reduced. So I think your answer is good. I'm going to take this next one and I'm going to answer it, Annie, but I'd love to see if you have a counterpoint. So Walter asked about low-fat cottage cheese. And, you know, the thing that we haven't really talked about a lot is dairy in this diet. So in the Mediterranean diet, there's full-fat dairy. DASH diet, they talk about low-fat dairy. And in the Mind diet, they don't talk a lot about it except in terms of the cheese and butter. I think low-fat cottage cheese is a healthy food. There is something called Good Culture or Nancy's, and it is probiotic. And that's a whole other area to talk about gut health. So I say low-fat cottage cheese is a regular part of my diet. With that said, Annie, do you have a different opinion on it? Because I'm interested.
No, I agree with you. And, you know, my diet, like you specifically address this, but in general, that you want to cut out as much saturated fat in your diet as possible. The Mind diet is really like less than 5% saturated fat. So what we would love for you to cut out is maybe whole milk or really like triple cream cheeses. But you save that for a very special occasion. Like I might serve a nice cheese like that at Christmas for dessert, you know, for example. It's a very special occasion. It's a very special cheese. It's not something I stack on with cheese and crackers every day. Yeah. And I think low-fat cottage cheese is fine. I like to eat some, when I choose dairy, I like fermented dairy. I often will choose one that's high in fat. Like I like a full fat Greek yogurt, for example, with my berries, because when you have something as nutrient dense as berries with all these anthocyanins or, you know, what's in pigments that make them so brain healthy, you need a fatty food with it as a conduit to help you absorb it more. So I like yogurt. And I don't have that much fat in my diet at all. I like my yogurt every day. It's a fermented food, which gives me lots of gut health benefits. I also like cashew yogurt though, and almond yogurt and all the other alternatives you see in the dairy aisle. The other thing about choosing your dairy products, if you choose to eat them, is that if you have problems with your cholesterol, like let's say your bad cholesterol is elevated, like your LDL, your low density lipoprotein, and your doctor's trying to get it down. Maybe he or she started you on a statin drug and told you to cut out, cholesterol in your food. It's really not the cholesterol in the food that makes your LDL go up. It's the saturated fat in your diet that makes your LDL go up. So choosing a low-fat cottage cheese or a low-fat yogurt would be a really good choice if you were someone who is trying to work.
Well, I think Annie has dropped off again. We really apologize for the audio quality, but I think she'll be joining us. However, in the meantime, I am going to take Helena's question on other oils. So we briefly mentioned different kinds of olive oil or different kinds of oil, and oils that provide a source of omega-3 fatty acids or omega-9 fatty acids are preferred. So olive oil is high in omega-9 fatty acids, and it's a very, very healthy for you. One of the challenges with the standard American diet is that we eat too many oils that are in the omega-6 category, which are pro-inflammatory. And off the top of my head, some of those are corn oil. Annie, what are some of the other omega-6 oils?
Grapeseed oil, corn oil, some canola oils, and any oil that's had heat applied to it as part of its processing. Like, as you can imagine, it's very hard to get oil out of a sunflower seed. So sunflower oil can be that way. A lot of these are made with GMO products, which we don't know are particularly good or bad for you, but they may also carry glyphosate with them into the food. So I make it really easy when it comes to oils. Extra virgin olive oil is one of the Mind Diet food groups of Brain Healthy Foods, and it's recommended that you use it primarily in your kitchen. So I use extra virgin olive oil for almost everything except for high heat cooking. And for that, I reach for avocado oil. Avocado oil has monounsaturated fats. It's also got some polyphenols, which is one of the things that makes olive oil stand out, is its polyphenol content. Kind of like, the same thing that makes red wine good for you and other things like that, and grapes. And then there's some other oils I use occasionally. Like, I do like to use a nut oil sometimes because of the flavor. Walnut oil or macadamia nut oil. Pecan oil is wonderful. It also has a high smoke point. So like if you were searing a piece of fish, which I don't really often do that much because.
Oh, I am so sorry about the audio quality. I am going to take this one last question. It's a really good one. And it's about Alzheimer's and like a ketogenic diet or ketosis. And I want to address this one because it came up in our research. So you will see a body of kind of scientific research looking at a ketogenic diet, which is very low in carbs and it's high in fat, including saturated fat, as another way to address Alzheimer's. It does it very differently than the diets that we talked about today. So the diets that we talked about, the Mediterranean, DASH, and MIND, they share kind of certain biological mechanisms. There's another scientific thought, that part of what may cause Alzheimer's is an inability to process glucose in the brain as we get older. And so that's the reason that the ketogenic diet is being studied. And, there are some interesting results. The research that Dr. Gardner and I did found most of those results were in animal studies. And it was hard for us because they hadn't largely been studied in humans to talk about them in our paper. So it's something to keep in mind. I think as researchers, scientists, and consumers of science, we need to keep an eye on it. Last question. I have a point of view, but I love Annie weighing in here. Is it okay to eat your leafy greens in smoothies, like frozen spinach or kale? What's your opinion on that one?
Absolutely, but mix it up. I think I think there is merit to actually chewing your food And because it delivers different types of fiber into your intestinal tract. And so the magic thing about, a lot of these vegetables that are high in fiber is that they help you cultivate a healthy gut microbiome. So the more fiber that you can consume, especially in the form of leafy greens and vegetables and such, the more different types of gut microbiota you will have. And they like their fiber different ways. Sometimes they like it, partially processed, like in a blender. Sometimes they actually like it to be broken down less coarsely. It may travel to the lower part of your intestine better that way. So I think smoothies are great. Get your leafy greens. I love is my mantra, especially in summer. And if you like it, smoothie, I think that's fantastic.
Annie, thank you. It's been delightful. We apologize for the lack of internet connection, but we overcame it. And I will be sending the recording. I'll be sending the recipes. I'll include a handout. And I also have my email address. So if there are questions that you still have that we couldn't answer, I've kind of plowed through these. I think I can address most of them. Just drop me a note and I would be happy to respond. Thank you so much, Annie, and to everyone who participated, and have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everybody. Nice
Bye
to see
now.
you, Sally. Bye-bye.